Here we have Florian Effenberger from the Document Foundation, and he will discuss his personal experience of growing from a user to an active community member. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and also welcome from my side to SFSCon. I'm proud to be here again. And in the next 15 minutes, I indeed would like to give you a bit of a personal talk this time and explain what matters on open source communities to me and explain a bit where I'm coming from. It should not be a talk about me, but still I need to say a few words about me so you have the background. So I started in 2004, nearly to the day 20 years ago, back then in OpenOffice.org, and made the way from contributor, from user to contributor. I worked in different fields. I had the marketing, I worked in a technical field in infrastructure, then sharing knowledge, as you will see, is one of the key things I found important in open source projects, which I did for a couple of years. These days, you mostly know me as my role as executive director with the Document Foundation, which I helped to set up. So I think it's fair to say that sort of unexpectedly, I managed to, by a lot of chance and luck, to turn my hobby into a profession. And I would like to explain a bit how that worked and what I think is important in open source projects and how to make them worthwhile. I would like to start with a few statements. I think on that we all can agree that free and open source is a license model. There are certain licenses, how you can classify the software. And just to mention it, I use the term free software, open source interchangeably for this talk. So with one, I mean the other and the other way around, just to have the same wording. The second statement, I think also on that we can agree, it's a development model. It basically explains how you can collaborate on code, how all that works from an administrative point of view. I think that is quite evident. But the third statement moves me a bit away from the technical and administrative aspects. To me, if we look at projects, it's a bit a paradigm how we can work together, how people can interact, how they can work together, how they can create something together. And the fourth statement is essentially an evolution of that, maybe a bit bold, but you could phrase that it's a bit of a life's philosophy. And I would like to explain you what I mean with that and why I think it is like that. So what many open source projects want is indeed the path from being a user to a contributor. And looking at myself, and I know it's maybe a bit of a controversial statement, but when I started my journey, that was a few years before I started with OpenOffice.org, was actually in the networking area. Back in my former school, we had back then a massive broadband access, but we had no router. Reason was around 2000, 2001, those were really expensive. And then group of colleagues and me naively said, well, let's build one ourselves. So for me, indeed, the entry to the field was also related to the price, because that was the thing that moved us to looking into free software. We can talk a lot about software freedoms, but that is one, I'm not saying the unique, but is one of the reasons why people might go into open source projects. Then when we started, we had no clue. We just naively said, let's try it, let's do it ourselves. And this do it yourself and learn out of that mentality is an important aspect in open source projects to me. And why is that? While the software is available, also documentation is available. So when we started, we had access to Linux distributions and firewalls and proxies and all that, but we essentially had no clue how that works. So there were manuals, there were how-tos, but much more important, there was an interaction with something called a community. There were actually people answering on mailing lists, on forums, in private emails, very naive newbie questions from people who had no clue. We were really clueless. We tried to educate ourselves, but we asked questions for someone from the field must have been completely stupid. Yet those people took the time and answered us. I remember exchanges with Samba maintainers, with Squid maintainers, with Postfix people. They were answering, and we could learn from that. So that is one of the pillars on which open source projects stand, to share knowledge, to talk to people, to answer questions, and to take people by the hand. And of course, there are many ways to contribute. I'm just listing a few, and I'm emphasizing documentation because I think it's one of the important aspects that is often overseen. Us, it helped a lot to get into the projects, to understand how this is working, and then afterwards share knowledge ourselves. The second thing important in projects is what I would call a credit of trust. When I'm looking back, how I started my journey at OpenOffice.org was, again, I was a user. Back then, again, the price was driving me. As a student, you don't have money, so that was a convenience. And then I learned there is something like a community. There are people doing something with it. There is some marketing, some development, but that was rather vague to me. I didn't have much of an insight. So I was lurking around, educating myself a bit, and I actually started with a trade show. I attended a trade show in Munich as a student, and again naively said, well, I'm around, I'm happy to help, but probably I was the worst candidate to do the job. I had zero experience on trade shows and had zero experience about the software. And I met a colleague, a friend of mine, who was the exact opposite. He was doing trade shows as a professional for decades, and he was a trainer on, back then, OpenOffice.org. So he really had a clue on both, and I had none. So my expectation was I could go there, I could help a bit, but what can I do? I'm not skilled, not at all. And I'm sure I'm not really, I'm not counting. I can help to carry stuff, but that's it. But the opposite happened. The guy took me by the hand, explained me how it works, and immediately he put trust in me. Again, I never ran a trade show. I had absolutely no clue whatsoever. Yet he took me by the hand, he shared his knowledge, and he trusted me. And that is something we often see in open source projects, that people are trusted. And what does that mean? If you work in a company, you have a lot of hierarchies, you have a specified role, you might not be able to exit that. And here, I had a chance to really look into different areas. Is it more infrastructure? Is it more marketing? Where are my skills? I could try something out without breaking too much. There were people guiding me, there were people helping me. And I think for many people active in open source projects, this is something that helps them to get started, that they can try out, they can discover their skills. One example I'm always making is back in the days in our projects, we of course had one of the cliches, a German teacher correcting the manuals, which is great because his experience, he could use his job experience he could use for the volunteer work. But we also had people dealing with completely different things than they were doing as a profession. We had a doctor active in graphics, and it was a very specialized doctor. So you also have people with very different skills, and they might be able to discover them in a project because they are trusted. They can do something. And from the first day, even if I had no clue, I felt really respected and valued. My opinion mattered. And that was a great and entirely unexpected feeling. I thought, I'm the newbie, I don't count, I don't matter, and the opposite was true. And that colleague actually trusted me, showed me around, and that helped me a lot to discover what do I like. And I think that's a very important aspect for free and open source projects. The next thing that matters a lot, of course, in companies you have colleagues, but I think in an open source project, you are a bit brave, you are a bit more open-minded maybe than you find people elsewhere. And that means you are easier to touch base with people from other countries. I mean, just see at other conferences, you meet people from many, many countries. And that helps you a bit to understand more of the world, to understand more of realities in other countries, of cultures, philosophy. When something good happens, then you have a more personal connection. Likewise, when something bad happens, when there's some political issue, when there's some environmental issue, you do have a personal connection to those countries. My story is that I was in touch with a person from Rio from 2000 on. I helped him back in the days on a server issue. And I never met that guy, and my Portuguese is as good as his English, so we couldn't really communicate. Yet in 2013, when I was invited to Brazil, I met him in person. We spent a really nice evening together as if we had been close friends for ages. And that was only possible due to a mailing list interaction back then. So there are personal contacts. And also when you attend a conference, you likely discover countries in a different fashion. You're not, when I was in Rio, I was really happy to not be, those big tourist buses where you're carried around the city and then at lunch you're parked somewhere to eat and they pick you up again. I was shown the country by 2 locals. And that was amazing. And I think this is one of the things when you're a bit more open-minded and when you have friends around the globe, that really enriches your life and what I consider really a privilege to have those friendships around the world. And that if we think a bit about the situation in the world, it shows us that if people want all those barriers that we see, they are not always, but mostly in our heads, and we can overcome them actually. So, I mean, you see here cultures, backgrounds, profession, ages, this is all what you find in a wide range in any open source project. You find the same in the world, so that helps you a bit to understand how things are going, and that helps you to interact with others to understand and appreciate different cultures. Why do I think it's a life's philosophy? So if we look what works in a small scale in open source projects, I think we can apply that not one-on-one, and it's not an ideal world and they're not unicorns flying around, but a lot of what works there I think could work also on a wider scope. If people work together, that can make the world go round. If people are more open and are happy to widen their view, are open to re-evaluate their view, to reassess their position, that can help to make the world go round and hopefully avoid some crisis. Sharing knowledge and evolving things by working together, but not treating knowledge as your unique trade secret, but making it available, that can help the world to make go round. Motivation is key, because I think you can only motivate someone if you're motivated yourself, at least in the long run. So also that we find in open source projects, and was like that with me. That colleague who took me by the hand was really motivated to present the project, to do something, and so he was motivated to motivate me, and that motivated me. So that was a great experience. Of course, what we have in the world, we also have in the small scope of the open source project. It's not that every day is fantastic and milk and honey is floating around. And we do have arguments, we do have crises and discussions and what I would call people with strong characters. But still, there's a lot of things to be learned from how things work or don't work in open source projects. And at the same time, what I like is that this idea that we had starting with software, with working on software and documenting it and testing it and localizing it, that this is growing. We talk about open data, open knowledge, open standards. So the whole idea how to work together, how to achieve something together, how to mutually respect one another, that these principles are adapted to more areas of working together. And I think that's why, for me, this is a bit of a life philosophy and something that can make the world go round. So with that, I'm already at my last slide. I wanted to share a bit what drove me, what I really appreciated, and especially when you look backward with a bit of distance, and that in parts it's 20 years old, to see how people supported you and trusted you and shared knowledge, what personally you could have you took out of that, how motivating that was, and also what a privilege that was. And I think especially these days is something we all should hold up. We all should propagate in open source projects, be them small ones, be them big ones, because I think in the end that is to the benefit of all of us. With that, thank you very much. If there are further questions, I think we have a minute. Otherwise, feel free to reach out. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Florian. Thank you. So there is any question from the public? Yes, one here, maybe with the microphone. No, there is another question. There.
Was this experience was in different open source project, or in particular in something, some program in particular, some association, I don't know?
So the majority in OpenOffice.org and what now is LibreOffice, in the beginning I had lots of outreach with other communities when I was working on that network infrastructure, but the majority of my experience is indeed based on the involvement of the OpenOffice.org projects. But I think it's comparable to what you see elsewhere with nuances, of course. Yeah.